Welcome, everybody, to a special edition of the Mastermind Series. And we have a guest that took a little bit of effort to obtain, and it's someone that most of you are familiar with, Foster Gamble, who produced the movie Thrive. And in my view, he's probably done more to bring all of the pieces together with what's really going on than anybody else that I know. And believe me, I've studied a lot of aspects. So, Foster, I think it'd be tough to say who you are and what you do in a brief way, but would you please, for those that don't know of you or don't know of your work, could you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. And first of all, just thanks for having me on, David, and for the acknowledgement to the Thrive movie. I will pass that on to my co-creator and my partner, my wife, Kimberly, and to the whole team. So I've had a very mixed path to get to where I've been. People who've watched the movie know that I was born into the Gamble family from Procter & Gamble. So I discovered, as I grew older, that I had access to some resources that could allow me to choose what I wanted to do with my life, at least to some extent, if I took care of them carefully. And so that helped to put me on a very committed quest for truth. And I also described in the movie how I was shown to duck under my desk and cover my head to protect myself from a nuclear bomb when I was a kid in elementary school, and that really woke me up to the fact that if that's the best the adults had to offer, I better start doing some of my own thinking. So I pursued paths of science and consciousness and business really all simultaneously. I started and ran a company in Silicon Valley for 8 years and have run other businesses and foundations. And that company was called Mind Center, and we had developed the state-of-the-art in brainwave biofeedback technologies and training. So that kind of shows where my business interest crossed with my consciousness interest, because we did studies with yogis and Zen masters and psychics and so forth who just had absolutely phenomenal control of their consciousness. But we also did public trainings for people, particularly from Silicon Valley corporations, for stress reduction and for creativity enhancement, and for many people just to accelerate the quest on their spiritual path, because the brainwave biofeedback does that very, very powerfully. And along the way, I really noticed that there were the three probably main kind of mind blowers of my life were, first of all, when I found the martial art of Aikido. I'd been an athlete in college, and then I started training in martial arts and was frustrated until I found Aikido, because in Aikido, it's a nonviolent martial art where you're really taught to resolve conflict without having to do violence even to the attacker, if possible. And that opened my mind to a level of energy access that I had only dreamt of. And then in my scientific pursuits, where my studies of new physics and cosmology and cosmic geometry led to being invited into so-called new energy labs, where I've seen numerous technologies which pull energy right out of space itself and pour it out, cleanly, inexpensively, and as much as you want. And I realized that was the same, those technologies were the same as what I had learned in Aikido, that if you understand how the energy in the universe works and you align with it, you mimic it, you can have access to basically infinite energy as long as you don't violate it in the process. And then my third big discovery was the whole notion of true personal liberty and sovereignty. And I know I saw a report that had been given me from you, David Morgan, that's been a real interest for you also, with the Liberty and the Austrian School of Economics and so forth. And we talked in the movie Thrive about how the fundamental energy pattern for sustainability throughout the universe, as far as we can tell, is this donut-shaped whirlpool vortex called the torus. And when you apply that to devices, you can access clean, free energy. When you apply it to ecosystems, you can end up with organic polyculture and healthy, sustainable yields rather than, GMOs and pesticides and fertilizers all that kind of stuff. But when you apply it to the human level, it's really recognizing that the fundamental shape, the fundamental wholeness at the human level is the individual human being, not the group. A real group, a true community, is made up of sovereign individuals coming together. And a true market, a real economy, is not someone trying to centralize control over everyone else's decisions any more than someone would be able to successfully control the weather of the planet. I view a true economy to be billions of independent voluntary exchanges happening on a daily basis. And out of that, price gets determined and resources get distributed accordingly and so forth. So for me, recognizing that the protection of individual rights is also the protection of economic rights. And when done, the more that's done, the more it leads to prosperity, security, happiness, and true community. So that's just a little glimpse of some of the things that have brought me to where we are now.
Very good. Well, the first question is going to involve that, first of all, there's this coincidence or serendipity I have to state, because as David Smith was doing his job to ask you to come on board the mastermind for us, you were doing what you do, and it happened to be right in line with what I wanted to discuss with you. So early on, put up this video, early on meaning in the last month or so, you put up a video regarding that, gee, the question I'm asked the most is what's really going on with the economy. And then you alluded to this Dragon family and this gold, and I bought the book you recommended, Gold Warriors, and unfortunately I haven't finished it yet. I wanted to before the interview, but I haven't completed it. Regardless, you had this outline of the economy, which of course is what I focus on. And then you have a membership portion of your site, so I joined that and I listened to the 2-hour webinar you did a few Saturdays ago, drilling down more on that economic question. So I'm going to just open it kind of wide open to you. If you could review what the preliminary video was about on the economic situation, and then how you drilled down to the 5 ABCDs possibilities that are out there that could be very positive to the way this world global elite have been managing the economic system for so long.
Sure. No, I'd be delighted to. I really do feel like we're living in probably the most exciting, maybe the most risky, but also the most exciting time for individual creativity toward the thriving of humanity throughout recorded history. And a lot of it is not known by a lot of people yet. So I'd love to share this information, and I'm certainly ongoingly discovering it myself. And thanks, David, for joining our Thrive Together conversation. We've really decided just in the last month, for the audience, what you're referring to is we've decided to open up the Thrive Movement think tank to be online once or twice a month with live videos using this same WebEx and this incredible technology. And so we're opening up that conversation, and it very much it has to be focused on what's going on with the money scene, because no matter how well-intended people are, they don't get a whole lot done, particularly on a global scale, if they're not able to garner resources to do it and create effective partnerships and so forth. So what David is referring to is we were giving some insight into, first of all, just a little bit of history of the development of humanity through an unusual lens. We're taught in high school and college a very manipulated and inaccurate view of history for the reasons of the state. But the more you look into looking at history through the lens of real people, not just conquerors and bankers, and look at the history of gold, the history of banking, and the history of wars, you begin to realize they're all inextricably entwined and then sanitized for history books. And so many of the wars going back, to Columbus and beyond, I mean, they called it a discovery, but it was really an ongoing war against the native people to steal the gold and send it back to Europe. And then you look at each of the world wars and Vietnam and then Iraq and then Libya, and on. To make it a long story short, it doesn't take a lot of searching to find out that the bankers have been funding usually both sides of each major war. And the first thing that they do, and oftentimes the reason for the war itself, first thing that the conqueror does when they take over somebody else's land is steal their gold, as well as then take their resources and try to take over their tax base. When you understand the motivations throughout history aligned with those perspectives, it's very different than making the world safe for democracy, or fighting terrorism, or these other excuses that get concocted to enroll the population into supporting their government in doing, this outrageous and imperialistic acts. So, but looking back a little bit through just the last century, if you look back to the time of the founding of the Federal Reserve, in 1913, both the Federal Reserve and the IRS were created at the same time. And this was basically finally kind of a fruition of the Rothschild and British banking goals to take over the U.S. again. And they pretty much effectively did it. In 1913, the Fed was created, and since that time, 97% of the value of the dollar has been dumped down the drain, or more accurately, into the bankers' pocket. And in 1933, then President Roosevelt confiscated all the gold in Bretton Woods Conference. In 1944, after World War II, they basically consolidated the whole global system into a global fiat money system with the dollar as the instrument of exchange, and the whole thing really under the control of the Bank of International Settlements, which is run by the central bankers. Now there's at the time the Federal Reserve was created, I think there were something like 4 central banks. Now there's over 150. And many of you may know that the so-called axis of evil was pretty much the countries who hadn't gone along yet with the Rothschild central banking system. And now all of them, except I think North Korea and Iran, have been drawn into, by force, into that system. But anyway, fast forwarding to 1963, President Kennedy signs this executive order, 11110, look it up, and he basically makes an agreement with President Sukarno of Indonesia to back the U.S. economy with gold owned by the Asian elders and hidden in gold troves in Indonesia. And so this was all signed, and basically Kennedy was going to take the dollar back to being an asset-backed currency. And of course, the bankers didn't want this because they were driving as fast as they could toward a total fiat system, because then they can control it and print all the money they wanted. And shortly after President Kennedy made this deal with Sukarno, which was also going to be used to develop Asia and Africa, Kennedy was killed within 2 weeks of signing that agreement. So I think that was one of numerous reasons why he was taken out. But then 1971, Nixon takes us off gold entirely, and here we are now with the U.S. having at least $16 trillion, $18 trillion in debt, and Bernanke having given away at least $16 trillion to domestic and foreign banks in the 2008 crisis. Now, recently, the quantitative easing, so-called, a cute name for printing money and just giving it to the banks, that was finally ended, as you probably know, just about a month ago. I'm being told by my contacts with the Asian elders that was being done because the elders had terminated the contract of the Federal Reserve to print money for the first time, really since the Bretton Woods agreement. And that was because we're all taught, even if people who know about the Federal Reserve, we think they're making it up out of nothing. I've been learning that actually it's all been borrowed against the Asian gold. And the repayment is overdue. It hasn't been repaid, and basically the the Western banking cabal has basically destroyed the global economy and most of the environment, and so their contract to use this money, to be the ones to distribute money worldwide, has been terminated. So it remains to be seen if that's true, but there's a lot of evidence building up to back that up. Now, on the flip side of the equation, what we're seeing is the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and now over 100 countries who have joined them are creating an alliance to create an asset-backed world economy and to try to restore a thriving status to countries all over the world. And that would mean basically sidestepping the Federal Reserve System, the IMF, the World Bank, and the BIS. And that's not a popular move with the cabal, but those countries have a lot of nuclear weapons, million-man armies, they own a lot of our debt, so they can't be pushed around easily. So I think we're on the verge of either real catastrophe in this country or changing to some potentially very positive scenarios. So the thing that I did in the last blog was lay out 5 potential scenarios that I'm seeing. And I'd be happy to do that, but I don't want to be too long-winded. Any questions or comments before I go on to that?
Yeah, the comment I'd like to make, Foster, is maybe back up slightly and tell us about the gold hoard that the Dragon families own, who they are, because you referenced the Asian gold a couple times, and I know what it is because I've followed, this part of your work very, very closely, but some of our listeners on the mastermind don't really know what that means.
Yeah, thank you for that reminder. I appreciate that. Yeah, the gold, since the scenario I described, where gold gets collected in wars and then, hidden and protected, also in wars, if a country thinks they might be invaded and can't protect their own gold, they often send it to other bigger countries with agreements to pay for safe storage. And that happened a lot around World War II. A lot of countries sent their gold here, but they also buried a lot of it in Asia, in Indonesia, in the Philippines, in Vietnam, in China, and there is an alliance of elders, of royal families from each of those Asian countries, and they call the alliance the White Dragon Society, or the Alliance of Asian Elders, and they see themselves as the stewards, the spiritual safekeepers of this gold. And I have been told by pretty authoritative sources that this gold represents probably over 90% of the wealth of the world. So this is way beyond what the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and the Buffetts and Gateses of the world have. And this is almost entirely off the books gold. So if you look to see how much each country holds, you're not going to see this gold. And this book, The Gold Warriors, describes that. And David, for you and other people, it's a pretty big, thick book, but you don't need to get through it. If you read the first 45 pages, you're going to understand the scenario, because they do an overview of the entire story, and then they go into great depth in a real kind of James Bond page-turner story, but one that is actually true and has 2,000 photographic documents to back it up. And so basically we're in a situation now where these Asian elders possess most of the asset wealth of the entire world. And the Federal Reserve and the Western banking system is totally in debt to them. So they have been, according to my sources, very carefully playing a game of chess with the Western cabal once they saw that the cabal wasn't going to use that money for humanitarian purposes, quite the opposite. They have been in a game of basically checkmating them to wait till they're in a position where they can't be pushed around, as I described, and where they can offer alternatives, not only to the U.S., but to the entire world, to take us all to another level. Because there is no reason in terms of minerals, in terms of resources, food, water, all that, why anyone should be suffering, much less the incredible level of despair that's on this planet right now. So I've been told that the elders, their commitment is to the spiritual legacy of their family, of their people, and to humanity. as opposed to just greed and control, which has been the operative mode in the Western banking cabal for at least decades, if not back to the founding of central banking 400 years ago. So basically what I'm being told is that the elders have said to the cabal, we will give you a soft landing. You know, you're overdue in your debts, we're foreclosing on you, and we will help you have a soft landing if you're willing to actually partner with the world rather than try to dominate it. So that would mean that as the elders release trillions or quadrillions of dollars worth of wealth into the world, a lot of that would flow through the Western banks. You know, the big banks, the Citigroup and Chase and B of A and Wells Fargo and so forth, so that they could actually get some real deposits on their books. So the hundreds of trillions of dollars in derivatives debt that has them completely crippled and running on fumes could actually ultimately be erased if they're willing to go along with this. As well, the debt of the U.S. Treasury could be forgiven, and part of the release of these funds would accompany a global currency reset, where all the currencies, major currencies of the world, would reset based on their real resources and their productivity and their services, not based on their military power or their debt. And so this is the offer that's on the table and has been being negotiated for over a year very intensely now. We've been told a lot of times that everything was signed and sealed, and then the U.S. Government would back out time after time. And so here's the scenarios that we're looking at as possible, because the elders are committed to releasing a tremendous amount of this wealth for humanitarian purposes. First of all, to reboot the global economic system on a healthy asset backing, to forgive a tremendous amount of debt for those who deserve it, and then to flow this vast wealth fundamentally into humanitarian projects all over the world. So in scenario A, plan A, the U.S. Treasury goes along with the elders. What we've been told is the whole rest of the IMF, over 180 countries, have already agreed to this new system, and the software has already been installed in every major central bank computer in the world. They are ready to go with this new asset backing system as soon as the U.S. Goes along with it, or it doesn't. Now, if they do go along with it, it could be just a tremendously wonderful scene where even if the dollar gets revalued down, at least now it's worth something, rather than be just based on ghost debt. And the tremendous amount of money would come into lots of projects, which would create new jobs and take care of people most in need, and fund new technologies and new media systems, and it really foster an independent way of doing business worldwide rather than just state-controlled. And so that is plan A. And plan B is where the U.S. Treasury decides not to go along ultimately with this offer. And so the cabal resists, and they continue to try to manifest their one world government, their U.S. police state. The dollar and the U.S. economy would go into almost immediate collapse. Basically, the rest of the world would go ahead without us and isolate the U.S. With drastic consequences for us. Now, I don't think that the government would have any money left to pay the military or the police forces and so forth. So I don't think that the police state would happen, but they would certainly try to do martial law and all of that. It would not be a pretty sight for any of us. So I hope plan B is not what happens. Plan C is where things go forward, but without the elders being able to release this money, and the Western banking system, under the control of the Bank of International Settlements, continues to take over and create their one world banking system. Their proposed cashless currency for this is the SDR, the special drawing rights created by the IMF. And basically in this system, we would have a global version of what has happened in the Western countries already, but now it would be everywhere. Some people have referred to this as the slow burn, where we just continue to collapse, and they finally, the New World Order people get rid of the resistance from the U.S. by collapsing the U.S. economy, at which point most people think, oh, well, we just need to be saved by anyone with the money, and oh, now we're going to be one world, but it's a one world domination instead of a one world cooperation. So that would be Plan C, where basically the BRICS countries are in collusion with the IMF, with the U.S. Treasury, with the World Bank, and so forth, to have a world banking-dominated civilization. Plan D is where the Chinese just continue on their own to use their growth in economy. And I guess I just saw a Reuters article yesterday that as of yesterday, their GDP has now passed the U.S. They are the number one economy in the world based on real products and services. So they're obviously growing very rapidly. And if they have all these gold troves, and the elders can't keep the PRC from just taking it over, or just using the gold that they've already amassed and are mining as fast as they can, we could basically, in Plan D, be in a new era of Chinese dominance by the PRC rather than U.S. Treasury and government dominance, which I don't think would be really probably much better than what we've got now, potentially even worse. And so I'm not a fan of Plan D at all. Now, Plan E, I'll go through one more, is, and this one may sound ridiculous to some of you, but it's worth really considering. If you spend some time looking at the evidence, and we presented a bunch of it in Thrive, for the existence of extraterrestrials and interdimensional entities who are not only visiting us now, many species, but who have been visiting us for thousands of years, and it's in the records of virtually every major country in the world, the question comes up, well, what role are they playing? And everybody's got different stories about harmful ETs, the reptilians, the archons, the tall grays, the mantids, and so forth, who, may be just fine within their own worldview, but they don't have our best interests in mind. They want our resources. They want to live within our atmosphere because something happened to their planets, or whatever their story is. It doesn't look like it would end well for us. Other people say that the small grays, the Syrians, the Pleiadians, the Nordics, the felines, other species that are, it probably sounds like we're living in the Star Wars bar, or I've completely lost my common sense. But if you check it out, there's overwhelming evidence, particularly from high-level military, government, and FAA sources, that this has been going on for a long time. And I've had the privilege to meet numerous very credible people who have been contacted, either abducted or invited onto ships. They've seen the drives of the ships. They've met with these beings and actually report incredibly advanced, not only technology, but advanced consciousness, and in many cases very loving beings. So my point in saying this is that the higher that I get in my own context, whether it's the financial world, the government, the military, and the media, the higher I get, the more I talk to people who either have been doing deals with ETs or have contacts with them or are being guided by them in some way. Almost every successful free energy inventor that I have visited with has ultimately acknowledged to me that he either has direct contact with extraterrestrials or he's being guided by telepathic inner guidance that seems, that's way beyond their own rational minds. So this is actually a scenario worth entertaining. I highly recommend, because I'm being told that they are actually, the ETs that do have our best interests in mind are doing everything they can to keep us safe and to keep our sovereignty from the ones who don't. So Plan E is where the ETs actually play a major role in this and hopefully help us to not only evolve as species, but to gain and then maintain our true sovereignty, not only financially, not only amongst ourselves, but in the cosmos itself.
Okay, very good. Well, I'm going to ask you about the Plan U, because that was on your
Okay.
Feature. But I want to circle back to the BRICS because I could argue that it's a good cop, bad cop scenario, and they both want the New World Order, which means that we're, being played again.
Uh-huh.
Or I could also argue almost as strongly or just as strongly that the BRICS really do want to make themselves independent of what I call the Anglo-American Empire, that banking cabal, and that is, from my perspective, a viable choice, or at least they're trying to make that viable choice. What does Foster Gamble have to say about those two entities?
Well, I think it's a really, really interesting question. I certainly don't have the answer. The contacts that I have to the elders are very impressive in terms of how they represent the consciousness of the elders. And I ask myself a lot. We'll get to Plan U in a minute, but I ask myself a lot, if I had, a quintillion dollars in my gold troves, what would I do to try to save the world? And I actually think that they have, if it's true, they have been very brilliant so far in terms of being patient and in terms of getting themselves in a position where they can actually get rid of, really obsolete, the banking cabal and the whole shadow government and so forth, and have the opportunity to bring in a thriving world and to use that wealth to back, good human beings who actually want to make that happen. So I don't know if that's happening for sure, and I'm very wary in case it's not. I continue to be in all my communications with them and with the public. I do see them, this is the BRICS countries, creating their own banks, creating their own internet, creating their own stock exchanges, and on, in order to get out from under the NSA and to get out from under the Washington Consensus and so forth. And I think that's a very positive step. The fact that they're going to asset-backed economic systems is a very positive step. And then the fact that there are numerous superpowers amongst that alliance, I think, will help to keep any one rogue country in check. So if China tried to just run the whole thing, I don't think India and Brazil would let them, and vice versa. So I think moving in that direction is very positive, and what I'm trying to do is to affect that conversation, because if I had to bet, I do think that this scenario A is taking place if the U.S. Treasury is willing to go along with it, and that the Asian elders, at least, do have humanity's best interest in mind. At the same time, I don't have any guarantee yet that they're able to think other than in terms of royalty and in traditional authoritarian hierarchies. So I'm in that conversation with some representatives from them, and I like the way the conversations are going, but I can't feel certainty yet. I can't guarantee anything yet. I think it's one of the reasons why I refer to this as such a creative time, because I don't think any of us have all the answers. But I see very creative, open conversations going on that could end up shaping humanity's opportunities. I don't mean authoritarian edicts, but literally free market and sovereign opportunities for individuals where we could actually create a thriving world faster than I had ever imagined possible. Because once the cabal is out of the way and tremendous resources are available, what I've noticed, I wrote over 100 articles for our website on the critical issues in every sector of human endeavor. And it was a very depressing project for quite a while until I realized there's actually a very few people who are perpetrating the damage. And once they're out of the way, energy could release in a very positive, very creative ways. And also that all of the issues in our Thrive Solutions Hub, there are over 1,000 self-created Thrive Solutions groups in over 97 countries around the world now who are taking on over 200 different issues. Now that could be very diluting and distracting and whatever if we didn't understand that all of those issues, whether it's GMOs or pesticides or chemtrails or banking schemes or police state or whatever it is, that all of those issues are breakdowns in the wholeness of a natural system, wholeness of a sovereign human being, wholeness of an ecosystem, wholeness of an honest media system, wholeness of an honest economy, and so forth. So what we need to do is simply be able to recognize who's in the way of our restoring wholeness to natural systems. And then as people who are awake to that have plenty of funding, which I think is coming soon, I think we're going to break through and move each of the systems back to wholeness in a way that's self-reinforcing and just beyond our wildest dreams in terms of thriving.
Excellent. Well, let's go ahead and discuss option U, which I think was very key to everyone, myself included, of course, and that's one about us that think for ourselves, that are critical thinkers.
Okay, great. So this is my favorite conversation these days, and I'm just enrolling the smartest, most open-minded people I know in our network and inviting them to ask themselves, what would you do if you were in charge of a quintillion dollars and you wanted to fix the world? And so I'm getting very, very interesting feedback. Virtually no one, even the major researchers and economists and so forth that I talk to, hardly anyone has ever even had that thought, much less, really put in strategic think tank timing. But let me give you an example of the type of things that are arising. One is what we call a flow-through funding network, a global network of trust. And that is that if, let's say, 5,000 projects are selected around the world by the Asian elders as the first ones that are getting funded based on their merit, based on a track record of effectiveness, based on their ability to scale globally, the success of their projects and so forth, there's still, it's a real challenge to distribute even $1 trillion, much less, a quintillion. So one of the ways to do that and not get caught in the old top-down hierarchy or bottlenecking those funds is each of those 5,000 projects gets the next round of funding, and they distribute it to the people in their downstream from them who've been most successful in receiving funding from them. They now not only get projects for their funding, funding for their projects, but they get the next wave of funding coming through, where the head of each project is asked to spread out, $3 billion to the best people that you know, who are doing the good work anyway, but they're doing it on a shoestring, and you trust them, and you can monitor their effectiveness and so forth. So you begin to get this global network that's growing organically based on trust, effectiveness, and exhibited intention, rather than on, where you went to college, how much money you've got, who you know, that type of thing. So it's really an organic, grassroots distribution of wealth to transform the planet. Another aspect of this is just dramatic transparency, rather than the kind of covert deception that's been going on top-down so far. Another is tremendous funding into education, because unless people understand the true history of what's gone on in the world, unless they understand the philosophy of liberty that actually includes everyone, and a free market economy that honors everyone's transactions and so forth, we're just going to wind up with the next regime, rather than actually breaking through into a completely new paradigm where there are laws, but they're only protective laws. There are rules, but there are no rulers, where no one has rights that no one else has. And most people have never thought this way either. So these are just a few of numerous inputs that we've got that are looking very valuable, that are kind of shaping up into an open source global business plan that people get to contribute to, as long as they're not violating anyone, that could actually transform the entire scenario.
Excellent. You may have heard of Rick Mayberry's work. I'm not sure if you do. Rick and I are pretty good friends, and he talks about the 2 laws. And it basically boils down to how simple it is to have rules without rulers. And the first law is do everything that you agree to do, which is basically the foundation for contract law.
Yes.
And the second one is not to infringe on the right of any other person.
Yeah.
And that's really what it takes. But I don't want to drill down there too far. But, for feedback to you and the group, there are a few of us that do think in those, I guess you could call them idealistic ways. But we certainly have convoluted the system to this minuscule, you can't park your car on Thursday afternoon if there's, it just gets so absurd.
Yeah, let me just say a couple of sentences about that before we move on, because it's so critical to all of this. And even many of my closest friends have never had the opportunity to think this way. And I've been blessed to have a decade in on this thinking and to have met some of the greatest thinkers who are laying out how a world of non-authority can work. And it really comes back to those very two rules. The non-initiation of force, so you can't you can't hurt anybody or take their stuff, but then also you can't just breach contracts. If there's a price to pay, if you don't keep your word, you need to make restitution and that type of thing. And what I have found, I'm actually writing a book on this right now, is that there's a certain number of mind traps. Like, what about the roads, and what would we do for security, and what about sick people and so forth, which are really great questions. It just turns out that when you study how each of those questions would be answered, they make sense, they align with true human motivation without doing harm, and they're going to work, they've already been shown to work when they've had an opportunity, much better than any government has ever been able to do those things. So the last thing I'll say about that is that one of the most common mind traps is people think, since we do have to have organizations in order to do things effectively, that therefore those organizations should be state-run by the monopoly that owns force and money. And that's never led to good news. The flip side of that is, yes, we're going to have organizations, but they're all voluntary organizations. So you can choose who you want to have lead you if you want to work in an organization. You're also free to leave at any time, and neither the individuals nor the organizations can do any harm. And there's three legs to the stool that can support all this. And most people don't know about this, but if you have independent security organizations, then people can be protected without anyone having a monopoly on force. And those security organizations, they have to compete in the open market for a reputation of reliability, non-violation, good product at a decent price and that type of thing. So that's number one, is private security to protect people, numerous organizations. Then secondly is independent dispute resolution, because this takes the place of the monopoly on so-called justice, which has also not worked out. So there would be independent, it's kind of like mediation or arbitration, where you jointly choose an organization which has a really good reputation, and as soon if they were to make a terrible decision or violate people, they would lose their reputation, they would lose their business, and thirdly, they would lose their insurance. And that's the third leg of the stool, because, we've got a bunch of corrupt insurance companies now, but if they had to compete in a true open market without government subsidies, very quickly you would have well-priced insurance that was reliable and, for instance, in the mode of health, would actually align the motivations of the doctors, the healers, of the clients, of the people, and of the insurance companies all together. So with those three legs to the stool, it turns out that it answers so many questions that otherwise people don't even bother to think about.
Fantastic. How do you see the honest money situation? And let's take the scenario A, where the elders come in, the U.S. adopts the program, and they start funneling real wealth into the world to correct all these problems. Do you see honest money at that point as being just a transition phase, that maybe our consciousness could move beyond that to some point where we're just based on, a non-monetary system? Have you thought about that, or do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I've thought about it a tremendous amount, and I've had numerous in-depth discussions with people from the Venus Project and the Zeitgeist Movement and other, resource-based economy people who want to move beyond money. There's a common, saying out there that money is the root of all evil, and I think that's a dangerous misunderstanding. I think it is dishonest money that is the root of a lot of evil and destruction. But I honestly do not think that we can live and thrive without some sort of medium of exchange until the point where we can manifest whatever we want with our consciousness. So whether you want, some food or a computer or a car or, a really exquisite, unique painting by some artist that you respect, until you can create those things that you want just with your mind, then there's always going to be scarcity. And I don't mean scarcity in the sense that people need to be suffering, but scarcity in the literal sense that if you want something you don't have yet, like a new computer, then you're scarce that computer, and you need to do something to get that computer. And so if we don't have a medium of exchange, obviously barter or just gifting, is great if that works in a situation. But if it's mandatory, then you're back to some sort of communist system or socialist system where there's a few elite in charge of what everyone else can and can't do, who gets the resources, who gets to decide, what the distribution is and all that type of thing. So I think it's critical that people make the distinction between an honest medium of exchange versus fiat money versus counterfeit versus fraud and all those type of things that has come to be known as capitalism, and it's not at all. It's, it's corporate capitalism, it's crony capitalism, it's crooked capitalism, but it's not actual free market capitalism. But it's a dangerous misunderstanding there. And I think that the next key to honest money is having a free market in money. So if somebody wants to open up a bank on the corner where they're passing out monopoly money, they can do it. They'll ultimately need to either close it down or call it a circus or an entertainment site or something like that, because if there's another bank on the opposite corner that actually takes your deposits, secures them, keeps 100% of those reserves, and then loans out real money and gives your money back whenever you want it, everybody's going to go over to that bank immediately who's got any sense at all. So the best currencies, the best banks, the best mediums of exchanges, whether it's gold, puka shells, Bitcoin, whatever it is, the best ones are going to rise to the top and sustain. A lot of people are asking, well, what is the right money system if the one we've got isn't? And I think it's the wrong question. I think that any time somebody's thinking, what system shall we impose, that you're on the road to tyranny once again.
I really love that train of thought of yours, and I totally agree with you. And, the idea that you can have, I don't know if society is the right word, but a global humanity without a bunch of rulers. I mean, and you're spot on about the free market comments as well, and those that know my work know that my philosophy and life's work have basically been proving that we don't have free markets, and, we ought to try it sometime. It might be really, really good if we did. If you don't mind, I'd like to move on to what your next topic is going to be in the Thrive series, which is on energy. I do not do a lot of work there. I read a great deal, but I don't feel that it's, I've devoted enough time. But one area that's really fascinated me is we did a white paper at the Morgan Report on thorium. Have you looked into thorium as a resource?
Not much. I've been reading a little bit about it myself. None of our inventors, the ones that I'm working with right now, are specifically working with thorium. I think that it holds a lot of potential. I don't know that much about the dangers of it yet. I know that it's less radioactive than uranium and plutonium and that kind of stuff. From what I've read, I think it has potential, and I think that there are other new paradigm technologies, some of which I've seen, which will just obsolete all of this very quickly, because they're based on such simple materials, such simple construction, and they're very inexpensive to build, inexpensive to run, and they don't carry the same dangers as certainly nuclear technologies, combustive technologies, but also even what they call the LENR or LENR, the lattice energized nuclear resonance technologies. I'm looking into some of those. There are a couple of inventors who are working with it that I have visited their labs, and I've been impressed by what I've seen. They're not quite all the way there yet. But I'm also a little concerned about those inventors, because I've met other inventors who are sick from working with with different types of fusion technologies, which just they're not going to explode. They're not going to blow up your city, but they still, some of them emit radiation, which when you're working with it a lot, some of them can make people sick in ways that I don't think are necessary. But let me give you just a little bit sense of, we've become kind of this cosmic dating service now, where we're both contacted by inventors and philanthropists and investors who are looking for game changers. And so we've been starting to hook them up together. So we send a survey out to potential investors and grantors, and we ask them, we tell them the areas that we're working with in what we call our Thrive Connect project, which is innovations of all sorts, not just technology. But and that our next Thrive Together event is going to be on all sorts of breakthrough innovations, some of them technological, but also in other areas of health and water and eco communities and more social and environmental type of things. But here's a little list of the types of just in the energy realm, some of the technologies that we're working with and seeing. There's cold fusion, there are biofuels, there's battery charging, there's anti-gravity technologies, there are battery storage technologies, there's wireless transmission. But in the areas of power generators themselves, we're looking at cavitation, fusion, geomagnetic, hydrogen, resonance, solar, solid state, toroidal vortex coil, and turbines. So there's a lot of different ways of approaching accessing energy. But the main paradigm shift, what makes these things different, is that for the most part they're accessing the energy that's already in the field. And that's how they can run so-called over unity with more power out than is going in, because the second law of thermodynamics says you can't do that. But second law of thermodynamics specifically refers to closed systems. And an atom is not a closed system, and a solar system and a galaxy, a human being is not a closed system. And neither are these free energy technologies. And that's why every single one that I've seen be successful is in one way or another accessing this toroidal form. Early in the 20th century, inventors used to try to, make them cubical. They try to do this stuff in boxes, or they try to put them in metal spheres. And they would always freeze or fry. They'd either get too hot or they get too cold, because they weren't exchanging energy with their environment. And that's the power of the torus, that it's distinct unto itself, just as you and I are, but we're also connected with the whole rest of the universe, through our cells, through our atoms, through our mouths, and these technologies are all open at the center so they can balance energy with the rest of the universe. So it's very exciting what we're seeing, and of course, as I laid out in the film, the powers that be and want to control energy and want to control fuel and want to control people's lives, they don't want this to happen. So they have been going to great extents, and sometimes very tragically, of stopping people from creating these breakthroughs that would serve all of humanity.
Very good. I'll just take one more comment, then we'll open up to questions. But, we at the Morgan Report and others, it's certainly not our unique idea. This is well known if you think about it. But nothing happens without energy. Yeah. And to determine really what the per capita standard of living is, you look at something called energy flux density, which is this fancy way of saying if you have the availability in North America to have so many kilowatts per month, you have a far higher living standard and ability to create things than if you are in a third world country where you might have one solar panel for the village. And this idea that you're doing with Thrive that allows all of these breakthroughs almost, if I can use the word simultaneously, or at least synergistically,
Yes.
has, as you said in the beginning, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but we're on the precipice of something extremely large here because it goes throughout the whole human condition, really on a global basis.
Yes.
But I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jimmy. I can't see, as you know, I've only got the phone down here. Can you see if we've had any questions typed in for Foster Gamble?
Hi, David. I don't see any questions here in the box. I do have the Q&A up.
Okay, that's okay. Foster, I know you gave us your time, the most valuable commodity any human has, so we've got about 5 minutes left in what you allocated for us. Is there anything that we haven't discussed that you would like to share with our mastermind group before we call today?
Yeah, let's just continue for a few minutes the conversation that we were just having. We talked about these tremendous technologies that are actually already in existence for energy, and they also exist in health, in the area of health, water purification, agriculture, and decontamination. Those are the main technologies that we're dealing with now, and I mentioned also that they are being suppressed and have been. But I don't want to leave the story there because just like most people have probably seen the film Who Killed the Electric Car. Well, they did make the electric car very sick, and they put it in a cage for decades. And now people are driving electric cars. And the same thing is going to be happening, except at a much faster rate in all these other areas. I don't see any way that the cabal can stop what me as one individual, what I'm seeing now. I think in the next 5 years there'll be 200 new energy companies around the globe. And it's happening in all different countries. And then there are the health technologies. I've seen technologies which can bring people from virtual paralysis, seizure level MS and so forth, back to and multiple sclerosis, back to walking around and talking clearly in a matter of minutes. And I've seen the same thing in water purification, technologies that could restore pure water all over the world very quickly. And understandably, these people know they have to be very careful in how they're bringing it out. But our group, Thrive Connect, and other groups around the world are not only looking to bring funding to these geniuses who are having the courage and the stamina to do these things now, but we're bringing them consulting teams, if they want them, to advise on security, keep them safe, and to advise on legal structures, how to protect themselves that way, and how to create a business plan and do the marketing and distribution and manufacture and all that stuff, because it's not enough to just have a brilliant idea. It does take a village of different people with different intelligence and different skills to actually get this stuff out. But the rate at which I'm seeing it, and I loved your word before, David, it's happening synergistically, and they're all going to feed it on each other. And for those of you who may not need one of these particular technologies, I've been working with some of the economists who were involved in the Thrive movie to get estimates of if we simply had free energy and got rid of the Federal Reserve, what kind of impact would that have on a normal family, on a normal, working adult? And the estimates I'm getting are between 6 and 10 times the assets and income that you have now is what you would have just with those two changes alone. So all of a sudden you're not paying for gas, you're not paying to heat your home, you're not paying taxes that go to the military and the Federal Reserve, it just starts multiplying. And then as people have more assets, they're not only able to take care of the people around them, choose the schools of their choices, but now they're creating humanitarian projects and they're creating conscious businesses. So now all of a sudden they're creating wonderful products and they're hiring people. Those people are getting wealthy and creating more businesses. So I recommend to people that you do a 5-10 minute meditation sometime where you imagine walking through the streets of your city and everyone that you encounter is thriving. They actually have the food and water they need. They've got a job doing what they love doing. They've learned how to be successfully in relationship with people. Just imagine what that is like, because I know that's where we're heading if we make it as a species. I think that's what some of the ETs are trying to coach us in. And as we learn to restore whole systems, to be in harmony with how energy flows, all of that's possible. And as we say in the last line of the Thrive theme song, we already have what it takes to thrive.
Beautiful. Well, I'm happy to end it there if you are. I certainly want to thank you again for your time, and hopefully I can have a private word with you occasionally. There's a couple ideas that I'd like to put out, but I don't have to go to you direct. I can probably put it on the bulletin board of your website.
Well, I would love to interact with you anytime you want. I can't tell you what a relief it is to me personally just to be able to have such a full conversation with people who've been doing similar research and really stretching their own minds to think what could actually work to replace the current systems. And I also want to acknowledge you for using what I think is the lifeblood of humanity's transformation right now, which is independent media, to empower this type of conversation and to offer this to the people in your network is just tremendous gift, and it's exactly what's needed. So I really feel an alliance with your whole team, and I look forward to future collaborations.
Very good. Jim, if there are any questions at this time, go ahead and take us out, and thank you again.
Thank you, Foster, and thank you, David, and thank you for all of our listeners to tuning in to this edition of the Morgan Report. Thanks, guys.
All right, thank you.